The Last Emperor: A Reign of Glory and Tragedy. The world of China's last emperor, a figure shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Born in 1906, he was just 3 years old when he ascended to the throne, making him the youngest ruler in Chinese history. But his reign was far from easy, as he faced numerous challenges and crises throughout his life. Despite these difficulties, the last emperor made significant efforts to modernize China and bring it into the 20th century. He implemented a series of reforms and policies aimed at improving the lives of his people, but these efforts were met with resistance and ultimately failed. Today, his legacy remains a subject of debate and controversy, but there is no denying the impact he had on China and the world at large. The last emperor of China, Pu Yi, was born in 1906 to the ruling Qing dynasty. As a child, he was pampered and sheltered from the outside world. He lived in the luxurious Forbidden City, where he had access to all the amenities that royalty could offer. Pu Yi's education was limited to traditional Chinese subjects such as calligraphy and literature. He was not exposed to modern ideas or technologies until much later in life. Despite his sheltered upbringing, Pu Yi showed an interest in foreign cultures and languages, which would later prove useful during his reign. In 1908, at the tender age of just 2 years old, Pu Yi was declared Emperor of China. As you can imagine, being a child emperor came with its own set of unique challenges. Pu Yi's education and upbringing were heavily controlled by his regents, who often used him as a pawn in their political games. When Pu Yi turned 6, he was officially crowned as the Emperor of China. However, he had little real power and was instead controlled by a group of powerful regents. Pu Yi struggled to assert his authority and often found himself caught between conflicting factions within the imperial court. During his reign, the last emperor of China attempted to modernize and reform the country in order to keep up with the rapidly changing world. One of his most notable efforts was the 100 Days Reform, which aimed to modernize the government, education system, and military. The reform also included the establishment of a constitutional monarchy and the promotion of civil rights. Despite the promising start, the 100 Days Reform was met with resistance from conservative officials and ultimately failed. However, it laid the foundation for future reform movements in China and demonstrated the last emperor's commitment to modernization. The Xinhai Revolution in 1911 saw the overthrow of the Qing dynasty and the establishment of the Republic of China. The emperor was forced to abdicate and went into exile shortly thereafter. It was a dramatic end to a tumultuous period in Chinese history. After his deposition, the last emperor was forced to leave the Forbidden City and live in exile. He first went to Tianjin, where he lived in a European-style villa for several years. However, he was eventually forced to move to a smaller house due to financial difficulties. In his later years, he struggled to make ends meet and often had to sell off his possessions to pay for basic necessities. Despite these challenges, the last emperor remained committed to preserving Chinese culture and history. He wrote several books on various topics, including calligraphy, poetry, and history. He also became a Buddhist monk and spent much of his time studying Buddhist texts. In his final years, he suffered from multiple health problems and passed away at the age of 61. The legacy of the last emperor of China is a complex and controversial topic. By many, he is remembered as a young ruler who tried to modernize his country and bring it into the 20th century. He implemented reforms such as the 100 Days Reform, which aimed to modernize China's political and economic systems. However, these efforts were met with resistance from conservative forces within the government and society. The controversies surrounding the last emperor of China are complex and multifaceted. On one hand, he is credited with attempting to modernize China and bring it into the modern era. However, his efforts were met with resistance from conservative elements within the government and society at large. In conclusion, we have explored the life and times of China's last emperor. From his early life and ascension to the throne, to his reforms and modernization efforts, and ultimately his fall from power and exile, the last emperor's legacy is one that continues to fascinate and inspire us today. Despite the controversies surrounding his reign, the last emperor's impact on China and the world cannot be denied. His attempts at modernization and reform were ahead of their time and set the stage for future developments in China's history. As we reflect on his life and legacy, let us remember the importance of embracing change and striving for progress in our own lives.